The two leaders are seeking to break out of the dangerous cycle that created so much concern last year. Peace and verifiable denuclearization must remain the clear and shared goals. As I wrote to both leaders last month, the road ahead will require cooperation, compromise, and a common cause. There will be inevitably ups and downs, moments of disagreement, and tough negotiations. Relevant parts of the United Nations system stand ready to support this process in any way, including verification if requested by the key parties. They are the protagonists. But the International Atomic Energy Agency has a mandate to apply safeguards on all nuclear material in peaceful use, including all material removed from military programs.
Now, for more on this, we are joined by correspondent Nick Harper, who is keeping an eye on this story from New York. A very good evening to you, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we've just heard now a few hours left before the much talked about meeting between President Donald Trump and Chairman Kim Jong Un. We just heard the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, saying that they will be offering, or rather playing, a particular role for this summit. What does he mean by this?
Yeah, I think in many ways, Antonio Guterres making it very clear that they are ready and able to help, but they're not the protagonists. Essentially, they are the supporting actor in this whole drama that's unfolding before us in a few hours' time. The United Nations has the ability, it's done so in the past, to be able to send verification teams to look at nuclear material, but also to work out ways of disposing it. And I think that is what Antonio Guterres is promising, because he knows it's all very well for world leaders to talk about denuclearization, but they perhaps don't have the agencies or the backup plans to work out the fine details of how all of that might work. So, for example, he's detailed the fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency is able to apply safeguards and also able to look at the nuclear material and help to remove it from the country as well. He does, however, feel that this is a very positive development. When he spoke to reporters earlier, he noted the fact that so often he speaks to the press about what he called deep concerns, but he said that this time round he had a bit of good news, and he went on to talk about the summit in some very warm, very optimistic terms, that he was essentially looking forward to what potentially could happen in terms of denuclearization.
Now, Nick, the Korean Peninsula has been a blind spot for the Security Council. But then do you think the talks have brought some relief, particularly to the P5, well, that's the 5 members, the permanent members of the Council, who have been seized with this matter for quite some time now?
Well, they have been. They've been implementing sanctions against North Korea for well over a decade, since the first nuclear test back in 2006. A whole raft of different sanctions over the years, but we haven't really seen any of them work. Over the course of the last 12 or 18 months, the UN Security Council on a couple of occasions have imposed what they've called the toughest sanctions yet. The idea being that they cut off all possible revenue streams that North Korea might have, try and reduce the ability for them to get money into the country that they can then pump into their nuclear testing program. They have imposed those sanctions. We have heard that it has had an impact on the economy, but it hasn't really dented the will of the government to go ahead with the continued testing of the nuclear weapons program and the missile testing as well. So yes, it does provide some relief, essentially something of a breakthrough that the UN Security Council hasn't been able to achieve, but they are there ready to be able to ease sanctions if it comes to that, or impose further sanctions if these talks were to fall apart, and if we were to get to a situation where the rhetoric was ramped back up and more testing were to happen.
Well, there is hope and optimism. Many are saying that you are dealing with two difficult characters. I mean, for example, we saw what happened to the G7 summit when President Donald Trump refused to endorse the communique at the end of the summit. But then do you think the two leaders will reach compromise with the aim of progress in the talks?
Well, it's so difficult to know. These two leaders, they are not exactly known for playing by the rules. They don't exactly follow through with promises, and they often resort to rhetoric or off-the-cuff comments, veering away from the script. Like you mentioned, Donald Trump at the G7 seeming to agree to that communique, only to jump on a plane and suddenly tweet out that he was going against the whole thing. So there is that concern that we will have two very volatile, hot-tempered leaders in a room together. They might not be able to find compromise. That is the big thing that the United Nations is saying needs to take place. Antonio Guterres once again putting his stamp on this idea of compromise, that there will be ups and downs, but essentially they need to move together in the right direction to try and denuclearize the peninsula.
Nick Harper, thank you so much for your time. That was our correspondent in New York, Nick Harper, giving us his impressions of the much anticipated summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un.